Hello, it's Mayelen Bengochea, Mayelen Bengochea for EDRL 472, doing my video presentation for one of our final projects. And today we're going to review an article that I read called Building Culturally and Linguistically Sustaining Spaces for Emergent Bilinguals, and using read-alouds to promote translanguaging by Sandra Lucia Osorio. So I'm going to share my screen with you. We'll go ahead and talk about why I selected this article. All right. Okay, so a review of building culturally and linguistically sustaining spaces for emergent bilinguals using read-alouds to promote translanguaging. So the first thing I want to tell you is about why I picked this article. I selected this article because it had all the requirements we needed. It was empirical in nature, and it was based on some data. And but the main reason would be just because I did get my master's in education and literacy studies, and last semester I just took another class on children's literature and just kind of fell back in love with children's literature, and knowing that the single most important factor to a child's success in their education is their literacy skills, and whether or not they're read to at home or they practice those literacy skills. So this article kind of grabbed my interest because it kind of put the read-alouds first and foremost in the classroom, but also just the fact that the teacher was brave and not afraid to throw in some read-alouds that had multiple languages, and just to kind of see how that benefited her students and see how they would respond, what languages they would respond in, and how they would comprehend the text when the text kind of traveled across languages from English to Spanish and back. And so the author writes, one way to welcome a student's resources is to promote translanguaging, which uses a multilingual lens. So I was really wanted to read this article because I noticed that the teacher was really trying to bring out the skills in our students that having English language learners and multiple language learners it's a strength, and they have some amazing language tools that can really come out. And so I kind of immediately saw myself, what would it be like? What if I was to use my favorite thing in the whole world, children's literature, to try to get my students learning multiple languages or using their multiple language skills? When they're afraid and they only think they can learn English, can I get them to bring out their second language or their first language by reading a story and trying to speak in their language? So a quick summary of the article. The research question, or it's mainly about a teacher who uses multilingual children's literature and traveling across languages herself, translanguaging to support her students in knowing that it's okay to speak a different language and to build that that cultural space and linguistic space. And she wanted to see what happened when children's literature was used to travel across languages. And she wanted to see the language dynamics of what would happen when she read some different literature during read aloud in her classroom that had 2 languages. So the main question was, can we honor the students' funds of knowledge? Students already have they've already started learning English. If they came from a native language and started learning English, they already have the background of learning a new language. And can we build those language skills in their first language? And can it transfer to their second language? Or maybe can they even learn a third language? So the question is kind of what happens when we introduce some children's literature that has different languages? And what benefits and dynamics do we see in the emergent bilingual students when we use multilingual read alouds? And by moving across both languages fluidly, reading the text in English and Spanish, and then speaking to my students in Spanish and having them possibly respond in Spanish or English, can I model this and practice and create a space in my classroom for students to use their language tools that they already have and develop their language abilities in whichever language they prefer? And the article was also a little bit about how the author, the teacher in the classroom, she wanted to replace her current curriculum that was a little bit centered, a little bit not as broad, Eurocentric, or can she use, can she replace the curriculum and use literature and classroom practices and activities that bring to the forefront the language knowledge that these students have, the diversity that they have, and instead of just focusing on English-based literature, only speaking English, a one-language setting, can we broaden our spectrum of languages in the classroom, not by using the curriculum as much, but supplement the curriculum with some diversity in literature? And then, so the participants in this research study were first graders under the teacher Sandra Lucia Osorio at Lincoln Elementary in a small urban community in Illinois. And that school, Lincoln Elementary, housed the dual language program, which was a 90-10 model, 90%. In first grade, 80% of the curriculum, literacy, writing, and math, were in Spanish, and then science and social studies were in English. So 80% of the instruction was in was in Spanish and 20% in English. And then the methods and the data collection and analysis, the data presented here was part of a larger study that looked at the implementation of culturally sustained pedagogies in a classroom, other classrooms that were including culturally safe spaces and linguistic spaces. This project, the research project, was supported by the National Council of Teachers of English Early Childhood Assembly as part of the Professional Dyads and Culturally Relevant Teaching Program. And some of the findings were that the students, then the methods were that the teacher had 4 read-alouds. Dear Primo, a letter to my cousin, that used some translanguaging English and Spanish throughout cross languages. She read Funny Bones, Posada, and His Day of the Dead, Calaveras. And then she read The Rancho Rabbit and the Coyote, a story, a migrant's tale, a story about a migrant. And then another story about a boy who spent time, who had a culturally diverse family, spent time with Spanish-speaking grandparents and English-speaking grandparents. And that story was called I Love Saturdays y Domingos. And so some of the findings were, after she read these stories that had the diverse language and cross language in them, the students did cross languages and respond in the languages that they preferred. And they would use the teacher's model, and if sometimes they would respond in Spanish if that was comfortable for them, and sometimes they would respond in English. They were kind of taking the cue from their teacher, and if they needed some culturally correct Spanish words, they would speak in Spanish. And if the teacher was using some academic language in English, then they would use their academic language in English. So the use of translanguaging practices, while she was reading these read-alouds and noticing the difference between the languages, and then the teacher she also pointed out some cognates, how some words are the same in Spanish and English. And so the reading of the text and the discussion after the text in kind of crossing both in 2 languages really supported and helped the students understand those texts and understand the discussion better, because they were able to use languages they preferred at times, and then at other times when they needed to learn and be challenged, their academic language, they were challenged as well. And she found that the students' interactions were telling her that they really were capable. They could use fluid language practices and kind of flow between and understand when it's necessary to use English academic language and when they could go to their first language. And it supported their understanding, their meaning making, and their classmates' meaning making as well. And so some of the implications that the teacher took away, and some of the things that I thought about too, were using more multilingual texts, just for English language learners overall, just really using diverse texts with different languages, not just Spanish and English, but really finding literature that honors culture and has different language in it. And then that not just translated, they're not just straight telling the story in another language, but telling the story of the culture and inserting cultural words that are important in dialects and vocabulary that's in both languages. And also finding texts that are using the translanguaging and purposefully mixing those languages and using certain languages and words at certain times to support that meaning making. So see, these are some of the stories that that the teacher read to her class, the read-alouds that did some translanguaging and crossed back and forth between Spanish and English. So as a critique, thinking back about the article, the purpose of the study was very clear. It was very clear, the methods and what the teacher wanted to find out. If she were to read these culturally diverse texts with 2 languages, would her students be able to use their language skills and cross between 2 languages? And it was very clear the way that she wrote that she was excited about using those practices in her classroom. And she really wanted to see how her students would respond and how it would benefit. And so she really was making the case for being brave and finding some new literature, and not just using the curriculum, but supporting it with some very diverse books. And I think that the topic of the study did fit into some of the other literature that was in this article is from the Reading Teacher Journal, and I think it's pretty relevant. It was the most recent issue that came out in September, and so it's a pretty relevant topic because we have quite diverse classrooms lately, and I think it does support some of the ideas and some of the methods and practices that I've seen in schools that I've been into, and certainly when I taught first grade, some of the standards and expectations for presenting literature in the curriculum. It's very along the lines and aligns itself with those standards. And in the study, there was a description of where it took place at the elementary school. I said previously it was at Lincoln Elementary in a suburb of Illinois. And the procedural steps were not the procedural steps were described, but not to a great extent explicitly, like exactly how she was going to decide which text to read aloud and how many times she was going to read aloud to her students, and how she was going to measure whether it was beneficial and if she was going to continue doing it. She did describe that the data was part of a larger research project, but she didn't present physical data or how it was collected or how it was analyzed. I kind of felt like it was more of her reflecting on her own practices and looking at other studies, being part of a larger study that looked at something that she wanted to try in her classroom. And the findings were explained pretty clearly. She did explain that that in fact her students were really interacting with the text and comprehending the text on a deeper level when they were able to discuss it and read it and be okay with sometimes using their academic language and sometimes crossing over to their first language and going back and forth. So she did explain that some of the benefits that it had to her students. And some of the things some implications or things that I took away from the findings of this article. What can I do in my classroom to support my English language learners? I think, is to find some very diverse bilingual texts that represent various languages and just display them in my classroom, and make a tradition and a cultural space in my classroom where it's okay to honor other cultures, to learn about other cultures, and in fact it is necessary, and it's a place where we can ask questions and learn about each other's culture and feel safe, and just honor the diversity that's in our classroom, and know more about each other through the languages we speak and where we are from. And then some other things I can do in my classroom to build that culturally diverse and linguistic space is to read these diverse texts, do read alouds each day, and read the texts and point out different uses of language. So when I have a text and I'm reading to my students and the author is going back and forth between English and Spanish, I can point out cognates, words that are the same, cultural words that are only in Spanish or English, and pointing out the differences between the languages. And then some other things I can do in my classroom are thinking about how I encourage my multilingual students in my classroom to use the uses of all their languages. So just creating a space in my classroom where it's okay to make mistakes. It's by learning English, you're being brave, and you have language learning skills that are so important that other students could learn, that other students can take note from and model, and would benefit sharing those language learning skills with other students. And I can ask myself, what are some ways I can support multilingual students when I don't speak their language? So really scaffolding my lessons, especially when I don't speak their language. But also just culturally, how and academically, how can I support my English language learners? And then how can I integrate multiple languages in my classroom when it's in an English only setting and most people feel like they should only speak English? How can I go against the grain and make it okay to speak multiple languages in my classroom? By showing artifacts and realia in the classroom, and the decorations, and the environment, and the literature that's in the classroom, and the discussion that goes on, and the speakers that visit our classroom, and just how can I create opportunities for my students to use all of their language resources, writing, reading, in their first language and their second language, and pairing them with students that speak another language, and just creating that opportunity for them to use academic language, and also fall back to and incorporate other new languages and native languages as they prefer, and when it's necessary. So I look forward to incorporating some of those things when I get back into the classroom. Right now I'm renewing my teaching license, and I'll be looking for some other teaching opportunities, and hoping for a diverse school with a diverse classroom where I can incorporate some of these fun things. And so here's the name of the article again. It was Building Culturally and Linguistically Sustaining Spaces for Emergent Bilinguals and Using Read Alouds to Promote Translanguaging. And it was in the Reading Teacher Journal volume 74, issue 2, pages 127 to 135, and I got it on this website. And I really enjoyed reading it, and it was amazing to see another teacher be really brave and incorporate some of this literature and these discussion practices and things in her classroom, and it inspired me to do the same. And I just have enjoyed taking this class and learning some of these strategies and stretching my thinking out of the box and stretching my practices as a teacher. So thank you for the opportunity, and I enjoyed reading the article.